The gunshot echoed through the dusty air of Castle Dome, Arizona Territory, 1883. As Tessa Lawson pressed her back against the splintered wall of her uncle's cabin, her heart pounding in her chest like a wild Mustang. She had nowhere to run, no one to turn to, and the cruelty of her circumstances was as harsh as the unforgiving desert that surrounded the mining town she'd called home since her parents' death 3 months ago. "You ain't worth the trouble you bring, girl," her Uncle Warren spat, the whiskey on his breath reaching her even from across the room. "Been feeding and housing you while you contribute nothing but another mouth to drain my pockets." Tessa's fingers clenched around the worn fabric of her mother's shawl, the last possession she had to remember her by. At 22, she'd done everything she could to earn her keep. Cooking, cleaning, mending, even taking in laundry from the miners to bring in extra coins. But nothing satisfied Warren's growing thirst for whiskey and gambling. "Please, Uncle Warren," she pleaded, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can work harder. I can find more laundry to take in from the miners. Shut your mouth." He slammed his fist on the table, causing the empty bottles to dance. "I've already made an arrangement." The door creaked open, letting in the blinding afternoon sun along with the silhouette of a man Tessa recognized as Bart Sullivan, the owner of the Broken Spur Saloon. His reptilian smile sent shivers down her spine as he entered, followed by a second man she didn't recognize. "Here she is, Sullivan," Warren said, gesturing toward Tessa as if she were nothing more than merchandise. "Just like I said." Tessa's blood ran cold. "What's happening?" Sullivan stepped closer, his eyes crawling over her in a way that made her feel unclean. "Your uncle owes me quite a sum, Miss Lawson, plus interest, and he's offered a unique form of payment." "No." The word escaped her lips as realization dawned. "Uncle Warren, you can't already done," he mumbled, avoiding her gaze. "5 cases of whiskey. My debt's cleared, and you belong to Sullivan now." The stranger who had entered with Sullivan stepped forward from the shadows. He was tall, with broad shoulders and a face weathered by sun and wind, yet younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 30 at most. Unlike Sullivan's garish attire, he wore simple trail clothes, a dark shirt, worn denim, and boots caked with the dust of long travels. His eyes, a startling blue against his tanned skin, assessed the situation with a calculating intensity. 5 cases, the stranger drawled, his voice low and measured. "That seems awfully cheap for a human life, Sullivan." Sullivan's smile faltered. "This ain't your business, Nash." The man Nash tilted his head slightly. "I'm making it my business." He turned to Warren. 10 cases of whiskey, best quality, for the lady's freedom." Tessa's breath caught in her throat as she stared at the stranger. Was he truly offering to buy her, and for what purpose? Sullivan's face twisted with anger. "Now hold on, 15 cases. Nash countered, not even looking at Sullivan anymore, his eyes fixed on Warren. "And you sign a paper stating she's free to go wherever she pleases." Warren's bloodshot eyes widened at the offer. 15 cases of good whiskey would keep him drunk for months. "Done," he said quickly. "Warren, you double-crossing," Sullivan began, his hand moving toward the gun at his hip. Nash moved faster than Tessa thought possible, his hand settling on his own weapon. "I wouldn't," he said quietly. The warning in his voice was unmistakable. Sullivan hesitated, then stepped back, his face contorted with rage. "You'll regret this, Nash. Nobody crosses me in my town." "Not your town," Nash replied evenly. "Not anymore." After Sullivan stormed out, Nash turned to Tessa. "Pack your things, Miss Lawson. You'll be leaving within the hour." Terror gripped her heart again. "Where are you taking me?" A faint smile touched his lips, softening his features. "Nowhere. I meant what I said about your freedom, but I don't recommend staying here." Confused and suspicious, Tessa remained pressed against the wall. "Why would you pay so much to help a stranger?" Nash's expression grew distant, as if seeing something beyond the walls of the cabin. "Because no person should be traded like cattle." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded document. "I had a feeling I might need this. Once your uncle signs, you'll legally be your own person again." "You came prepared to buy someone's freedom?" Tessa asked incredulously. Nash Barrett's eyes met hers, and for the first time she saw something genuine in them, pain, perhaps, or understanding. "Let's just say I've seen this before. Now gather your things. There's a stagecoach leaving for Prescott in an hour, and you should be on it." For the first time since her parents' death, Tessa felt a flicker of hope ignite within her chest. But as she quickly gathered her meager possessions into a small bundle, a new fear emerged. Prescott was unknown to her. She had no money, no connections, and no protection. "Mr. Barrett," she said, her voice stronger than she felt, "I appreciate your generosity, but I have nowhere to go and no means to support myself." Nash paused in his conversation with Warren, who was eagerly signing the document with shaking hands. "I own a ranch about 20 miles outside of Prescott. Could use help with cooking and keeping the place in order. It's honest work with fair pay if you're interested," Warren scoffed. "She's hardly worth the trouble," Nash's gaze hardened. "I wasn't asking you," he turned back to Tessa. "It's your choice, Miss Lawson. The stagecoach can take you anywhere you want to go. I can give you enough money to start fresh." Tessa studied him carefully. Everything inside her screamed to be cautious, to not trust too quickly. And yet, something about Nash Barrett's steady gaze and straightforward manner made her believe he was sincere. "Why would you help me beyond this?" she asked. "Everyone deserves a second chance," he answered simply. As they left the cabin with her uncle already opening the first bottle of his payment, Tessa took her first deep breath as a truly free woman. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in months, she felt a sense of possibility unfurling before her like the vast Arizona sky. The stagecoach journey from Castle Dome to Prescott was long and arduous. The wooden wheels rattled over rocky terrain, throwing the passengers against each other with every bump and dip. Tessa sat across from Nash, watching him from beneath lowered lashes. He'd barely spoken since they departed, his attention seemingly focused on the passing landscape outside the dusty window. "Mr. Barrett," she ventured finally, when the silence grew too heavy to bear, "I still don't understand why you intervened. 15 cases of whiskey is no small sum." Nash shifted his gaze to her, his expression unreadable. "I told you yes, that no person should be traded like cattle," Tessa finished for him. "But many men in these territories would say fine words while harboring less noble intentions." She straightened her spine. "If I'm to work for you, I need to know what kind of man you truly are." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Fair enough." He leaned forward slightly, his elbows resting on his knees. "My mother was sold to pay a debt when I was 10 years old. My father had gambled away everything we had, including her. I swore that if I ever encountered such a situation again and had the means to stop it, I would." Tessa's chest tightened at his words. "I'm sorry about your mother. What happened to her?" She ran. "We both did." His eyes darkened with memory. "Survived on our own until she took ill 5 years later. After she passed, I worked cattle drives, saved every penny, eventually bought my own land." Their conversation was interrupted as the stagecoach lurched violently, nearly throwing Tessa from her seat. Nash's hand shot out to steady her, strong and calloused but surprisingly gentle. The brief contact sent an unexpected warmth through her, and she quickly looked away, confused by her reaction. The other passengers, a portly businessman and an elderly couple, paid them little mind, too focused on their own discomfort to notice the exchange. As the journey continued, Tessa learned more about Nash's ranch, the Silver Creek, named for the stream that cut through the property. He spoke of it with quiet pride: the expanding herd of cattle, the small but solid main house, the bunkhouse for his 3 ranch hands. "It's nothing grand," he told her, "but it's good land with clean water, makes for good beef and a decent living." "It sounds wonderful," Tessa said honestly, thinking of the cramped, dirty cabin she'd shared with her uncle. "My father was a teacher before he and my mother came west for his health. We had a small homestead outside of Castle Dome. I know how to garden, preserve food, keep a house in order." "What happened to them?" Nash asked gently. Tessa swallowed the familiar pain that rose in her throat. "Influenza. It swept through the mining camps 3 months ago. They were both gone within a week of each other." "And you had nowhere to go but your uncle's," she nodded. "He was my father's half-brother. I'd only met him twice before, but he was my only family left." "Family should protect their own," Nash said, his voice hardening slightly. "Yes," Tessa agreed softly, "they should." By the time they reached Prescott, night had fallen. The town was larger than Castle Dome, with proper streets, substantial buildings, and a bustle of activity even in the evening hours. Gas lamps illuminated the wooden sidewalks, and music spilled from saloon doors as they passed. Nash secured rooms at the Arizona hotel's separate accommodations, Tessa was relieved to note. Before they parted for the night, he handed her a small pouch that clinked with coins. "An advance on your wages," he explained when she hesitated. "There's a dress shop down the street. Might want to get whatever you need before we head to the ranch tomorrow." Tessa's fingers closed around the pouch, the weight of it unfamiliar but reassuring. "Thank you, Mr. Barrett." He tipped his hat slightly. "Nash, if we're to work together, might as well use my given name." "Then you should call me Tessa," she replied, a small smile forming on her lips. "Tessa," he repeated, as if testing how it felt to say. "Rest well, we leave at first light." Alone in her room, the first private space she'd had in months, Tessa sat on the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the day's events. Just hours ago, she'd been property to be traded. Now she was free, with money in her pocket and the promise of honest work ahead. She should have been exhausted, but her mind raced with questions about the man who had changed her fate. Nash Barrett was unlike any man she'd encountered, direct yet respectful, strong yet gentle in his manner. There was an integrity about him that she found herself trusting despite her better judgment. Still, she reminded herself as she finally lay down, trust was a luxury she couldn't yet afford. Her survival depended on keeping her wits about her and her heart carefully guarded. Whatever Nash's reasons for helping her, she would remain vigilant. But as sleep finally claimed her, Tessa couldn't deny the small, dangerous spark of hope that had ignited within her, hope that perhaps at Silver Creek Ranch she might find not just work, but a place to belong once more. The morning brought clear skies and a crispness to the air that hinted at the approaching autumn. Tessa, dressed in a new calico dress of deep blue, simple but far better quality than anything she'd worn in months, waited in the hotel lobby. She'd used Nash's advance sparingly, purchasing only what was necessary: 2 work dresses, undergarments, a sturdy pair of boots, and basic toiletries. Nash appeared at precisely the time he'd promised, his expression warming slightly at the sight of her. "You look rested," he observed, taking her small bundle of possessions to carry alongside his own. "The first proper bed I've had in some time," she admitted as they walked out to where a wagon waited, hitched to 2 sturdy bay horses. The driver, an older man with a weather-beaten face and kind eyes, tipped his hat to her. "Miss Lawson, pleased to meet you. I'm Hank Wilson, foreman at Silver Creek." "Mr. Wilson," she acknowledged with a polite nod. "Just Hank, miss. We don't stand on ceremony at the ranch." The journey to Silver Creek took most of the day, with the terrain gradually changing from the town's outskirts to rolling grasslands dotted with juniper and pine. As they traveled, Hank shared stories about the ranch and its inhabitants. There were 2 other ranch hands besides him: Billy Thompson, barely 20 and eager to prove himself, and Miguel Sanchez, a skilled horseman who'd worked for Nash since the beginning. And Mrs. Redmond comes by twice a week from her place down the road to help with the washing and such, Hank added, "but she's getting on in years. Been hoping the boss would find someone to take over those duties full time." Tessa noticed Nash's slight discomfort at being discussed as if he weren't present. "I'm happy to take on whatever work is needed," she said. As they crested a rise in the late afternoon, Silver Creek Ranch came into view below them. The main house was exactly as Nash had described, not grand, but solid and well-maintained, constructed of hewn logs with a wide porch wrapping around the front. A small creek, glinting silver in the sunlight, cut through the property, and beyond it stretched fenced pastures where cattle grazed. A barn, bunkhouse, and several smaller outbuildings completed the picture. "It's beautiful," Tessa said sincerely, taking in the peaceful scene. Nash glanced at her, a hint of pride in his expression. "It's taken 8 years to build it to what you see now." As they pulled up to the main house, a young man, presumably Billy, rushed out to greet them, taking the horse's reins while Hank climbed down from the driver's seat. Nash helped Tessa descend from the wagon, his hand strong and steady as he guided her down. "I'll show you where you'll be staying," Nash said, leading her toward the main house. Inside, the house was simply furnished but comfortable, with polished wooden floors and large windows that let in the late afternoon light. The main room served as both parlor and dining area, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall. A hallway led to what she assumed were bedrooms. "This will be your room," Nash said, opening a door to reveal a modest but clean chamber with a bed, dresser, and small writing desk. "It's not much, but it's perfect," Tessa interrupted, genuinely pleased with the accommodations. After the squalor of her uncle's cabin, this room felt like a palace. Nash seemed relieved at her reaction. "The washroom is down the hall, kitchen's through there." He gestured toward a doorway off the main room. "I usually take breakfast at sunrise, dinner at sundown, lunch depends on the work day. I'll have meals ready," she assured him. He hesitated for a moment. "I should mention your duties here are strictly housekeeping and cooking. You're not." "That is, I want to be clear that I don't expect anything beyond that." Tessa felt a blush rise to her cheeks as she understood his meaning. "I appreciate that clarification." Nash nodded, seeming as uncomfortable as she felt. "I'll let you get settled." "Dinner's in about an hour, but don't worry about cooking tonight." Mrs. Redmond left a stew before she headed home. Left alone, Tessa unpacked her few possessions, arranging them carefully in the dresser drawers. The room's window overlooked the creek and the rolling pastures beyond, a view that brought an unexpected sense of peace. She ran her fingers over the clean quilt on the bed, still struggling to process how dramatically her circumstances had changed in just 24 hours. At dinner, she met Miguel, a quiet man in his 40s with intelligent eyes and a respectful manner. The meal was simple but hearty: beef stew, fresh bread, and apple pie for dessert, and the conversation flowed easily among the men, mostly centered around ranch business. "We'll need to move the herd to the north pasture tomorrow," Nash was saying. "The grass is getting thin where they are now." "Should be easy enough," Hank replied. "Weather's holding good." Billy, eager and energetic, leaned forward. "I've been working with that new colt boss. He's coming along real fine." Nash nodded approvingly. "Good work, Billy." Tessa observed the interactions with interest, noting the respect with which the men treated Nash and the fair way he seemed to value their input. This was not a man who ruled with an iron fist, but rather one who had earned the loyalty of those who worked for him. As the meal concluded, Tessa rose to clear the dishes. "The stew was delicious," she said. "I'll have to ask Mrs. Redmond for her recipe." "She'd be pleased to share it," Nash replied. "She's coming by tomorrow to show you around the kitchen and explain how things are usually done." Later, as Tessa prepared for bed in her new room, she found herself reflecting on the day's events. The ranch was beautiful, the work straightforward, and her employer seemed honorable. Yet she couldn't quite shake the wariness that had become second nature during her time with her uncle. Trust, she reminded herself, had to be earned. Still, as she drifted toward sleep, the sound of the creek flowing outside her window was soothing, like a gentle promise of better days ahead. The following weeks established a rhythm to Tessa's new life at Silver Creek. She rose before dawn to prepare breakfast for Nash and the hands, spent her mornings cleaning the main house and doing laundry, and devoted her afternoons to baking and preparing the evening meal. Twice a week, she rode with Nash or one of the hands into Prescott for supplies, gradually becoming familiar with the town and its inhabitants. Nash himself remained something of a mystery. He was unfailingly polite but maintained a certain distance. Their conversations rarely strayed beyond the practical matters of running the ranch, and he often ate his meals quickly before returning to work. At times, she caught him watching her with an unreadable expression that made her heart beat a little faster, but he always looked away when she met his gaze. As autumn deepened toward winter, the work on the ranch intensified. Cattle needed to be moved to winter pastures, repairs made to buildings before the cold set in, and provisions stockpiled. Tessa found herself taking on additional responsibilities as Mrs. Redmond's arthritis worsened with the changing weather. "You're a blessing, girl," the older woman told her one afternoon as they worked together in the kitchen, putting up preserves. "This place needed a woman's touch. Been too long with just men around." "Nash seems capable enough," Tessa observed, carefully ladling hot peach preserves into jars. Mrs. Redmond chuckled. "Oh, he's capable sure enough, built this place from nothing, but a man like that needs more than just work to fill his days." Tessa felt a flush rise to her cheeks. "I'm just the housekeeper, Mrs. Redmond." The older woman gave her a knowing look. "For now, perhaps." Before Tessa could respond, the kitchen door swung open and Nash entered, bringing with him the crisp scent of the outdoors. He stopped short at the sight of the two women, an awkward silence falling over the room. "Something smells good," he said finally. "Peach preserves," Tessa replied, grateful for the mundane topic, "and I've made beef stew for dinner. Sounds perfect for a cold evening." He hesitated, then added, "I was wondering if you might join me after dinner. There's something I'd like to discuss." Tessa's stomach tightened with sudden anxiety. "Is everything all right?" "Fine," he assured her quickly. "Just some plans for the ranch I'd like your input on." After he left, Mrs. Redmond raised an eyebrow. "Just the housekeeper, you say?" That evening, after the dishes were cleared and the ranch hands had retired to the bunkhouse, Tessa joined Nash in the main room. He stood by the fireplace, staring into the flames, but turned when she entered. "Please sit," he said, gesturing to one of the chairs. Tessa perched on the edge, her hands folded in her lap. "You wanted to discuss something?" Nash seemed uncharacteristically hesitant. "Yes, I've been thinking about expanding the ranch operations." Oh, this wasn't what she had expected. "I've acquired another parcel of land adjoining our northern boundary," he continued, sitting down across from her. "Good grazing land with an old homesteader's cabin on it. I'm considering renovating the cabin and starting a small breeding operation for horses, separate from the cattle business." Tessa waited, unsure why he was sharing this with her. "The thing is," he went on, "it would mean changes here. More hands to hire, more supplies to manage, more cooking and cleaning." He met her eyes directly. "It would be a lot of additional work for you, and I wanted to know if you'd be willing to take it on, with increased wages, of course." Relief mingled with something like disappointment in Tessa's chest. "Of course, I'm happy to do whatever is needed. There's more." Nash leaned forward slightly. "I'd like you to take charge of the household completely, managing supplies, hiring any additional help we might need, overseeing the domestic side of both properties." Tessa blinked in surprise. "You're offering me a position as, what exactly?" "Housekeeper isn't the right word anymore." A faint smile touched his lips. "Estate manager, perhaps?" "That's quite a responsibility," she said carefully. "You've proven yourself more than capable these past weeks," Nash replied. "You've transformed this house into a home, improved our operations, and even Billy's started bathing regularly." His smile broadened slightly at this last point. Tessa couldn't help but laugh. "A miracle indeed." "So you'll consider it?" he asked, his expression growing serious again. "Yes," she said. "I'd be honored to take on the role." Nash's shoulders relaxed visibly. "Good, that's good." He rose and moved to a small cabinet, returning with 2 glasses and a bottle of whiskey. "I thought we might celebrate the decision. If you'd like." Tessa hesitated only briefly before accepting the offered glass. The amber liquid burned pleasantly as she took a small sip. "To new beginnings," Nash said, raising his glass slightly. "To new beginnings," she echoed. As they sat before the fire, their conversation gradually shifted from ranch business to more personal topics. Nash spoke of his early days as a ranch hand, the lessons he'd learned, the mistakes he'd made. Tessa shared stories of her childhood, her parents' love of literature, and her father's dream of starting a school in the Arizona Territory. "He believed education was the future of the West," she explained. "That civilization would follow knowledge." "A wise man," Nash commented. "And what about you? What were your dreams before my world collapsed?" Tessa finished when he trailed off. She considered the question seriously. "I suppose I wanted what most young women want: a home, a family, work that matters. Simple things that suddenly seemed impossible after my parents died." Nash's expression softened. "And now," she met his gaze steadily, "now I'm beginning to believe they might be possible again someday." Something shifted in the air between them, a tension that hadn't been there before. Nash set down his glass and leaned forward, his eyes never leaving hers. "Tessa," he began, his voice lower than before, "I want you to know that a sudden pounding at the door shattered the moment." Nash rose quickly, his hand instinctively moving to the gun belt that hung on a peg by the door before he opened it. Hank stood on the porch, his expression grim. "Sorry to interrupt, boss, but we've got trouble. Riders coming in fast from the South Road." Nash's demeanor changed instantly, all traces of the intimate conversation vanishing as he transformed into the rancher facing a threat. "How many?" "5, maybe 6. Can't tell in the dark, but they're riding hard. Get Miguel and Billy, rifles, but keep them out of sight unless needed." As Hank hurried to comply, Nash turned back to Tessa. "Stay inside, away from the windows." Fear gripped her as she watched him buckle on his gun belt. "Who do you think it is?" His jaw tightened. "I have a suspicion. Go to your room and lock the door." "Nash, please, Tessa. I need to know you're safe." The urgency in his voice convinced her. She retreated to her room but left the door cracked open just enough to hear what transpired in the yard outside. The sound of approaching horses grew louder, then stopped. Men's voices carried through the night air, first Nash's, calm but alert, then another voice that sent ice through Tessa's veins, Bart Sullivan. "Quite a coincidence finding you out here, Barrett," Sullivan was saying, his voice dripping with false pleasantry. "Been asking around Prescott about you. Folks say you run a decent spread." "What do you want, Sullivan?" Nash's voice was flat, dangerous. "Just being neighborly. Heard you got yourself new property up north and a pretty little housekeeper from Castle Dome." Tessa's breath caught in her throat. "How had he found them?" "My business is my own," Nash replied, "and it's late for social calls." Sullivan's laugh held no humor. "Call it what you want. The girl belongs to me. Warren Lawson sold her fair and square." "No person can be owned." Nash's voice was tight with controlled anger. "Miss Lawson is a free woman employed here of her own choice." "I paid good money, and I paid double to ensure her freedom," Nash interrupted. "I have the papers to prove it, signed by her uncle and witnessed in Castle Dome. Now get off my property." There was a tense silence, broken only by the sound of horses shifting nervously. "This isn't over, Barrett," Sullivan finally said. "That girl cost me a business opportunity in Castle Dome. I don't forget debts." "Threaten anyone on this ranch again, and you won't live to collect any debts," Nash responded, his voice so cold it barely sounded like him. "Now ride out before I forget my hospitality." The tension stretched like a bowstring ready to snap. Then came the sounds of horses turning, hoofbeats gradually fading into the distance. Tessa sank onto her bed, trembling with delayed fear and anger. Sullivan had tracked her down. He hadn't forgotten or forgiven what happened in Castle Dome, and now he knew exactly where she was. A gentle knock at her door startled her from these dark thoughts. "Tessa, they're gone." She opened the door to find Nash standing there, his expression tightly controlled but his eyes revealing his concern. "You heard?" he asked. She nodded, unable to find words. Nash's hand clenched at his side as if he wanted to reach for her but was restraining himself. "He won't touch you, I swear it." "How did he find us?" she whispered. "Small territories have long memories and loose tongues," Nash replied grimly, "but don't worry, we're not without friends here." "Sullivan's not as powerful in Prescott as he was in Castle Dome." "What will he do?" Tessa asked, hating how her voice shook. Nash's expression softened, and this time he did reach out, his hand gently touching her shoulder. "Nothing he'll live to boast about. I meant what I said out there, Tessa. You're safe here, I promise." The sincerity in his eyes, the steady pressure of his hand on her shoulder anchored her, calming the panic that had threatened to overwhelm her. She found herself leaning into his touch, seeking the comfort he offered. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." For a moment they stood in the doorway, neither moving away, then Nash slowly withdrew his hand, clearing his throat. "We should both get some rest. I'll have the men take turns keeping watch tonight just to be safe." As he turned to leave, Tessa called after him. "Nash." He paused, looking back at her. "What were you going to say?" Before Hank interrupted, something flickered in his eyes, vulnerability, perhaps, or uncertainty. "Nothing that can't wait for a better time," he replied finally. "Good night, Tessa. Good night, Nash." Sleep eluded Tessa that night as her mind replayed Sullivan's threats and the protective fury in Nash's voice as he faced down the saloon owner. Her feelings for Nash had been growing steadily over the weeks, but tonight had crystallized them into something she could no longer deny. It wasn't just gratitude she felt for him, or respect for his fair treatment and generosity. It was deeper, more complicated, a longing that both frightened and exhilarated her, but Sullivan's appearance cast a shadow over these emerging feelings. Tessa had believed she was free of her past, able to build a new life at Silver Creek. Now she wondered if she had merely brought danger to Nash's doorstep, to this man who had already risked so much to help her. The following morning brought a cold, clear dawn and a tense atmosphere to the ranch. Nash gathered everyone in the main house after breakfast, his expression grave as he outlined new security measures. "No one rides alone," he instructed. Always in pairs at minimum. Miguel, I want you to ride into Prescott today and speak with Sheriff Patterson. Tell him what happened. The hands nodded soberly, understanding the seriousness of the situation. What about Miss Lawson? Billy asked, glancing at Tessa with concern. She can't stay here alone while we're all out working. Nash nodded. I've thought of that. Tessa will come with me today to the North property. I need to check on the progress there anyway. He turned to her. If that's acceptable to you, of course, she agreed quickly, both relieved not to be left alone and pleased at the prospect of spending the day with Nash. The ride to the northern property took about an hour, following the creek upstream through pine-studded hills. They rode side by side, Nash on his gray stallion and Tessa on a gentle mare named Daisy. The morning was cool but sunny, with a breeze that carried the scent of pine and sage. I'm sorry about last night, Nash said after they'd ridden in companionable silence for some time. Sullivan finding the ranch threatening you. It's hardly your fault, Tessa replied. If anything, I've brought this trouble to your doorstep. Nash shook his head firmly. No. Sullivan's quarrel is with me, not you. I interfered with his business, challenged him publicly. Men like that don't forgive such things easily. You did it to help me, she reminded him. I'd do it again, he said simply, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. They crested a rise, and the northern property came into view below them, a green valley cradled between rocky slopes, with the creek widening into a small pond near the center. An old cabin stood at the edge of the water, its log walls weathered but solid. Two men worked outside the structure, one repairing the roof while another constructed what appeared to be a new chimney. It's beautiful, Tessa breathed, taking in the peaceful scene. I thought so too, Nash said, a note of pride in his voice. The water never dries up, even in drought years. Perfect for horses. As they approached, the workers locals hired from Prescott greeted Nash respectfully. He introduced Tessa as his estate manager, a title that still felt strange but pleasingly substantial. While Nash inspected the repairs, Tessa explored the cabin. It was small but sturdy, with a single main room and a lean-to addition at the back. The workers had already replaced the windows and door and were in the process of rebuilding the stone fireplace. With proper furnishings and a woman's touch, it could become a cozy home. What do you think? Nash asked, joining her inside after his inspection. It has good bones, she replied honestly. The view of the pond is lovely. Who will live here? I was thinking of moving Billy up here eventually to oversee the horse operation. Nash ran his hand along a newly installed window frame. He has a way with the animals, and it would give him more responsibility. He'd be pleased with the opportunity, Tessa agreed. He looks up to you, you know. Nash's expression softened. He's a good kid. Reminds me of myself at that age, eager to prove himself, working twice as hard as anyone else. They shared a simple lunch by the pond, bread, cheese, and apples Tessa had packed that morning while discussing plans for the property. Nash valued her input, listening attentively to her suggestions about practical matters like storage arrangements and kitchen layouts. You have a good mind for details, he commented as they prepared to leave in the late afternoon. I tend to see the big picture but miss the smaller things that make a place work day to day. We complement each other, Tessa said, then blushed at how the words sounded. I mean our working styles. Nash smiled, a rare full smile that transformed his features. I knew what you meant. And you're right. The ride back to the main ranch was relaxed, both of them more at ease with each other than they had been before. The shadow of Sullivan's threat seemed distant in the golden afternoon light filtering through the pines. As they approached Silver Creek, however, the peaceful mood was shattered by the sight of smoke rising from the direction of the ranch. Stay back, Nash ordered sharply, spurring his horse forward. Tessa ignored the command, urging Daisy to follow as Nash galloped toward the ranch. As they cleared the trees, the source of the smoke became clear. The barn was ablaze, flames licking up the wooden walls as Hank and Miguel fought desperately to control the fire with buckets of water from the creek. Nash leapt from his horse before it had fully stopped, running to join the men. What happened? He shouted over the roar of the flames. Don't know, Hank called back, his face streaked with soot. Found it like this when we got back from the south pasture. Tessa dismounted and hurried to help, leading several nervous horses that had been freed from the burning structure to a safe distance. The fire had clearly been burning for some time. Half the barn was already consumed. For the next hour, they fought a losing battle against the flames. By the time the fire finally died down, the barn was nothing but a smoldering skeleton of blackened beams. Miraculously, all the animals had been saved, but the structure itself, along with stored hay and equipment, was a total loss. Nash stood staring at the ruins, his face expressionless but his body rigid with tension. Tessa approached him cautiously, her own clothes smoke-stained and damp from the firefighting efforts. "This wasn't an accident," he said flatly as she reached his side. "Sullivan?" She asked, already knowing the answer. Nash nodded once, his jaw clenched. "First warning, letting us know he can reach us here." "What will we do?" "Rebuild," he said firmly, "and be more careful." He turned to face her fully, his expression grave. "But Tessa, you should consider leaving. This is becoming dangerous, and it's you he really wants." Fear and anger flared within her equally. "I won't run," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. "This is my home now too, and I won't be frightened away." Something shifted in Nash's expression, surprise, followed by a warmth that reached his eyes. "Your home?" "Yes," she said simply, "if you'll still have me here, knowing the trouble I've brought." Nash's hand rose, hesitated, then gently touched her cheek. "There's nowhere I'd rather have you be." The moment was interrupted by Hank approaching, his expression troubled. "Boss, you need to see this." He led them to the back of the ruined barn where the fire had burned less completely. There, carved crudely into one of the remaining boards, was a message. "Next time it's the house." Nash's expression hardened. "Get everyone inside, we're doubling the watch tonight." That evening, after a somber meal, Nash gathered his men in the main room of the house. "Sullivan won't stop with the barn," he told them bluntly. "He's made that clear. So we have two choices, wait for his next move or take the fight to him." "I vote for the second," Miguel said quietly. The usually reserved man's eyes flashed with anger. "This is our home." "Agreed," Hank nodded. "Can't just sit around waiting to be burned out." "What's your plan, boss?" Billy asked eagerly. Nash glanced at Tessa, who stood in the doorway listening. "First, we need to understand what we're facing. Sullivan doesn't work alone, he has men, connections. Tomorrow, Miguel and I will ride into Prescott, speak with the sheriff, and gather information." "And then?" Tessa asked. Nash's expression was resolute. "Then we end this, one way or another." Later, after the hands had returned to what remained of the bunkhouse, the fire had damaged one corner of it, but it remained habitable. Tessa found Nash on the porch, staring into the darkness where the barn had stood. "This is my fault," she said quietly, joining him at the railing. "No," he replied firmly. "Sullivan's a snake. If it wasn't this, it would be something else. Men like him always find reasons for their cruelty." "Still," Tessa insisted, "you wouldn't be in this position if you hadn't helped me in Castle Dome." Nash turned to face her, his expression softening in the lamplight spilling from the house. "Do you think I regret it? Helping you, anyone would, seeing their barn in ashes." "A barn can be rebuilt," he said simply. "But finding someone who transforms a house into a home, that's rarer than you might think." His words sent warmth spreading through her chest despite the chill of the night air. "Nash, I care about you, Tessa," he interrupted, the words coming out in a rush as if he feared losing his courage. "More than I should, perhaps, more than is proper given our circumstances." Tessa's heart pounded against her ribs. How much more?" Nash stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "Enough that the thought of you leaving fills me with dread. Enough that when I imagine the future of this ranch, you're always part of it." His voice dropped lower. "Enough that I find myself watching you when you're not looking, wondering if you could ever feel the same." "I do," Tessa whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of her thundering pulse. "Feel the same." Nash's eyes searched hers, looking for confirmation of what he'd heard. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to step away, he raised his hand to cup her cheek. "Tessa," he breathed, her name a question and a prayer. She leaned into his touch, answering his unspoken question. His lips found hers in a kiss that began gently, almost reverently, before deepening with a hunger that matched her own. His arms encircled her, drawing her against the solid warmth of his chest as her hands moved up to tangle in his hair. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Nash rested his forehead against hers. "I should have done that weeks ago," he murmured. Tessa smiled, a giddy happiness bubbling up despite the danger that still threatened them. "Better late than never, Mr. Barrett." His answering smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "Indeed, Miss Lawson." For a moment they stood wrapped in each other's embrace, the smoldering ruins of the barn forgotten. Then Nash sighed, reluctantly loosening his hold. "It's getting late, and tomorrow will come early." "Yes," Tessa agreed, equally reluctant to break the magical moment between them. "You should rest." Nash caught her hand as she turned to go inside. "Tessa." She looked back at him questioningly. "Whatever happens with Sullivan, we'll face it together, I promise you that." She squeezed his hand, drawing strength from his certainty. "Together," she agreed. That night, as Tessa lay in her bed listening to the occasional movements of the men keeping watch outside, her mind was a whirlwind of emotions. Fear of Sullivan's next move warred with the soaring joy of Nash's confession and that perfect first kiss. Whatever dangers lay ahead, she was no longer facing them alone. She had found not just sanctuary at Silver Creek, but love unexpected, powerful, and worth fighting for. The next morning, Nash and Miguel departed for Prescott at first light, leaving Hank and Billy to guard the ranch. Tessa threw herself into work, knowing it was the best remedy for worry. She baked bread, mended shirts damaged in the fire-fighting efforts, and began cataloging what supplies would be needed to rebuild the barn. Shortly before noon, as she was hanging laundry in the yard, she heard the sound of approaching horses. Expecting Nash and Miguel returning early, she looked up with a smile that quickly faded when she saw 5 riders cresting the hill, none of them Nash. "Hank." She called sharply, dropping the laundry basket and backing toward the house. "Riders coming." Hank emerged from the bunkhouse with his rifle, Billy close behind. They flanked Tessa protectively as the riders approached, their faces grim. Tessa's heart sank as she recognized Bart Sullivan at the lead, his expensive clothes and slicked-back hair incongruous against the rugged backdrop of the ranch. His smile widened as his gaze fell on the charred remains of the barn. "Afternoon, Miss Lawson," he called, his voice carrying across the yard. "Seems you've had some bad luck here." "What do you want, Sullivan?" Hank demanded, his rifle not quite aimed at the men but ready to be. "Just a friendly visit," Sullivan replied, reining his horse to a stop at a cautious distance. "Thought I'd check if Miss Lawson has reconsidered her situation. Castle Dome misses its prettiest resident." "This is private property," Tessa said steadily, refusing to show fear. "And I'm exactly where I choose to be," Sullivan's smile hardened. "Choice is a luxury, my dear, one you may find yourself with less of if Barrett doesn't learn to mind his own business." "Your threats burned with the barn," Hank cut in. "You've got nothing more to say that we care to hear." "Oh, I think you'll care about this." Sullivan nodded to one of his men, who tossed something onto the ground between them. It landed with a soft thud. Nash's hat, stained with what looked horribly like blood. Tessa's blood ran cold. "What have you done?" Sullivan's laugh held no humor. "Let's just say Barrett and his Mexican friend ran into some trouble on the road to Prescott. Nothing fatal, yet, but their condition depends entirely on you, Miss Lawson." "You're lying," Billy burst out, his young face contorted with anger. "Am I?" Sullivan raised an eyebrow. "Then where is your boss? He should have reached town hours ago." Tessa's mind raced. It was true Nash and Miguel should have returned by now, or at least reached Prescott, which was less than 2 hours' ride away. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Simple," Sullivan replied, his eyes gleaming with triumph. "You come with me peacefully and Barrett lives, refuse, and my men finish what they started this morning." "Don't listen to him, Miss Tessa," Hank warned, stepping closer to her. "It's a trap." "Maybe," Sullivan conceded. "But can you afford to take that chance? Barrett paid a high price for you once. Question is, are you willing to pay it back?" Tessa stared at Nash's hat lying in the dust, her mind in turmoil. If Sullivan was telling the truth, Nash and Miguel were injured, possibly dying because of her. If she refused Sullivan's demand, their deaths would be on her conscience forever. But if she went with him, she would be returning to the very fate Nash had rescued her from, or worse. "I need proof they are alive," she said finally, forcing strength into her voice. Sullivan smiled as if he'd been expecting this. "Reasonable enough." He gestured to another of his men, who produced a folded piece of paper. "Barrett was conscious enough to write this, seemed mighty concerned about you." The man rode forward cautiously and held out the paper. Billy snatched it, backing away quickly before handing it to Tessa. With trembling fingers, she unfolded it. The handwriting was unmistakably Nash's, though shaky and smeared with what might have been blood. Tessa, don't trust him. Whatever happens, stay at ranch. Miguel hurt bad. Sheriff, the note ended abruptly, as if Nash had been interrupted while writing, her heart pounding. Tessa folded the paper and slipped it into her pocket, fighting to keep her expression neutral. How do I know this isn't forged? You don't, Sullivan admitted. But time's wasting, and so is Barrett's blood. What's your answer? Tessa felt Hank and Billy's eyes on her, waiting for her decision. Nash's words echoed in her mind. Don't trust him, stay at ranch. But how could she stay safe while Nash and Miguel might be dying? Then another thought struck her. Nash had mentioned the sheriff. He must have reached Prescott, or at least sent word ahead. Perhaps help was already on the way. I need time to think, she said, stalling. Sullivan's face darkened. You've got 1 minute, then we take what's ours by force. He nodded toward his men, who shifted restlessly on their horses, hands moving toward their weapons. Hank moved closer to Tessa, speaking low and urgent. Miss Tessa, get inside the house. Billy and I will hold them off as long as we can. There are 5 of them and 2 of you, she whispered back. You'd be killed for nothing. Not for nothing, Hank replied grimly. For the ranch, for the boss. Tessa looked from Hank's weathered face to Billy's young, determined one and made her decision. No, she said firmly. No one else gets hurt because of me. She stepped forward, moving away from the protection of Hank and Billy. I'll go with you, Sullivan, but I want your word that Nash and Miguel will be released unharmed once I'm with you. Sullivan's smile widened, triumph gleaming in his eyes. You have my word for whatever you think it's worth. Miss Tessa, don't, Billy pleaded. The boss would never forgive us if we let you go. It's not your choice to make, she told him gently. It's mine, and I choose to protect the people I care about, all of you. Turning back to Sullivan, she squared her shoulders. I need 5 minutes to gather my things. 2 minutes, Sullivan countered, and the boy comes with you to make sure you don't try anything foolish. Tessa nodded reluctantly, and Billy followed her into the house, his young face twisted with anguish. You can't do this, he said as soon as they were inside. The boss, he cares about you, really cares. I know, Tessa replied, quickly gathering a few essential items into a small bag. And that's why I have to go, but Billy, I need you to do something for me. She quickly explained her plan. Billy's eyes widened, then narrowed with determination. I'll do it, he promised. But Miss Tessa, what if? No what ifs, she interrupted firmly. Just make sure Nash knows I made this choice freely. Tell him. She hesitated, emotion threatening to choke her words. Tell him I'll find my way back to him. 2 minutes later, Tessa walked out of the house, her small bag in hand. Sullivan waited impatiently, gesturing for one of his men to help her onto a spare horse they'd brought. You're making the right choice, Sullivan told her as she mounted. Might even find you prefer Castle Dome to this backwater ranch once you're settled. Tessa said nothing, her face expressionless as she settled into the saddle. She glanced back once at Hank and Billy standing helplessly in the yard, then at the house that had become her home. Whatever happened next, she would find a way back. Nash had freed her once. Now it was her turn to save him. As Sullivan's party rode away from Silver Creek, Tessa focused on memorizing the trail, noting landmarks they passed. If when she escaped, this knowledge might save her life. They rode hard for several hours, taking an unfamiliar route that seemed to deliberately avoid Prescott. By late afternoon, they had entered a narrow canyon Tessa didn't recognize, with high walls that blocked the sun and cast the path into shadow. Where are Nash and Miguel? She demanded as they slowed to navigate the rocky terrain. Sullivan, riding beside her, merely smiled. All in good time, my dear. Our deal was that you'd release them once I came with you, she reminded him, struggling to keep the fear from her voice. And I will, he replied smoothly. Once we reach our destination, and I'm certain Barrett won't be following us anytime soon. The implication sent ice through her veins. If you've heard him, you'll what? Sullivan laughed. Remember your position, Miss Lawson. You're not the one making demands here. They emerged from the canyon into a small valley as twilight began to fall. A cluster of rough cabins huddled near a stream, not a proper town, but some sort of outlaw camp, Tessa realized with growing dread. Several men lounged outside the largest cabin, rising with interest as the riders approached. Home sweet home, Sullivan announced mockingly. At least for now. We'll move on to Mexico once things cool down. Mexico, the word struck Tessa like a physical blow. If Sullivan took her across the border, any hope of rescue would vanish. As they dismounted, Sullivan gripped her arm painfully. "Don't get any ideas about running," he warned. "There's nowhere to go but desert for 50 miles in every direction." He dragged her toward one of the smaller cabins, shoving her inside and closing the door behind them. The space was crude but serviceable, a cot against one wall, a small table with a lamp, a stove in the corner. "Where are Nash and Miguel?" she demanded again, backing away from him. Sullivan's smile was cold as he lit the lamp. "You really care about that rancher, don't you? How touching." He moved closer, forcing her back until she hit the wall. "But you're mine now, paid for fair and square." "No person can be owned," Tessa said defiantly, echoing Nash's words from that first day. "My uncle had no right to sell me, and you have no right to claim me." Sullivan's hand shot out, gripping her jaw painfully. "Rights are for those with power to enforce them, girl. Out here, that's me, not your precious Nash Barrett." Fear threatened to overwhelm her, but Tessa forced it down, clinging to the plan she'd formed. She needed to stay alive, stay aware, and wait for her opportunity. "Now," Sullivan continued, releasing her jaw to run his finger along her cheek, "I think it's time you understood exactly what." A commotion outside interrupted him, shouting, then a gunshot. Sullivan cursed, moving to the window to look out. "Stay here," he ordered, drawing his pistol before stepping outside. The moment he was gone, Tessa moved quickly to the table, searching for anything that might serve as a weapon. Finding nothing useful, she pressed her ear to the door, straining to hear what was happening. Men's voices rose in argument, too distant to make out words clearly. Then more gunshots, followed by the thunder of approaching horses. Hope surged in her chest. Could it be Nash? Had he somehow tracked them here? The cabin door burst open and Sullivan reappeared, his face twisted with rage. "Time to go," he snarled, grabbing her arm. "Your rancher's more persistent than I gave him credit for." He dragged her outside where chaos reigned. Men ran in all directions, some mounting horses, others taking defensive positions behind cabins. In the gathering darkness, Tessa couldn't make out the approaching riders, but the panic they inspired was evident. "Get her on a horse," Sullivan ordered one of his men. "We're heading for the South Pass." As the man moved to comply, a rifle shot cracked from the darkness and he fell with a cry of pain, clutching his shoulder. Sullivan cursed, pulling Tessa behind the shelter of a water trough as more shots followed. "Barrett," he shouted into the night, "I know you're out there. Come any closer and the girl dies." Silence fell, broken only by the moans of the wounded man. Then a voice called back, not Nash's, but one that made Tessa's heart leap with recognition. "This is Sheriff Patterson of Prescott. You're surrounded, Sullivan. Release Miss Lawson and surrender peacefully." Sullivan's grip on Tessa's arm tightened painfully. "The law has no jurisdiction here," he muttered. "We're outside the township." "Doesn't matter to a bullet," another voice called Miguel's. Tessa realized with relief. He was alive. Sullivan's eyes darted around, calculating his options. Most of his men had fled or were wounded, leaving him increasingly isolated. "Last chance, Barrett," he shouted. "Show yourself or she dies here and now." "I'm right here, Sullivan." The voice came from directly behind them. Sullivan whirled, dragging Tessa with him, to find Nash standing less than 10 feet away, his revolver leveled steadily at Sullivan's head. Despite a bandage visible beneath his torn shirt and blood staining one sleeve, his hand was rock steady. "Let her go," Nash said, his voice deadly calm. Sullivan yanked Tessa against his chest, using her as a shield while pressing his pistol to her temple. "Drop your gun or I paint this trough with her brains." Nash didn't move, his eyes locked on Sullivan's. "You're finished. The sheriff has your men. There's nowhere to run." "There's always somewhere to run," Sullivan snarled, "and she's my ticket out." Tessa's heart hammered in her chest, but beneath the fear, a strange calm descended. Nash had come for her, just as she'd known he would. Now she needed to help him finish this. "You won't shoot me," she said to Sullivan, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'm too valuable to you alive." His grip tightened. "Don't test me, girl." "She's right," Nash said. "You're a businessman, Sullivan. Dead hostages are worthless. Let her go and the sheriff might be persuaded to forget about the barn. Keep this up and you're looking at her rope." Indecision flickered in Sullivan's eyes, and Tessa felt his grip loosen fractionally. It was the opening she needed. With all her strength, she drove her elbow back into his ribs. Sullivan grunted in pain, his aim wavering just enough. Nash fired in the same instant that Sullivan's pistol discharged, the bullet whistling past Tessa's ear as she tore free of his grasp. She stumbled forward as Sullivan collapsed behind her, Nash's bullet finding its mark. Strong arms caught her, pulling her to safety as more men emerged from the darkness, the sheriff and his deputies, surrounding the remaining outlaws. "Tessa," Nash breathed, his free arm holding her tightly against him while his other hand kept his weapon trained on the fallen Sullivan. "Are you hurt?" "No," she managed, trembling with reaction. "You're alive, they said. They showed me your hat with blood." "Took a bullet to the arm," he explained grimly. "Nothing serious. Miguel got the worst of it, but he insisted on coming anyway." She pulled back enough to see his face in the dim light. "How did you find me?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Billy. Smart kid rode hell for leather through the back trails to Prescott after you left, found Miguel and me at the doctor's office." "I told him to wait," Tessa said, stunned. "To wait until Sullivan's men came for Nash and Miguel." "Good thing he didn't," Nash replied, his arm tightening around her. "Sullivan never had us. His men ambushed us on the road to town, but we fought them off, made it to Prescott, and were getting patched up when Billy found us." The sheriff approached, holstering his weapon. "Miss Lawson, good to see you safe. Barrett here nearly tore apart my office when he heard you'd gone with Sullivan. Is he?" Tessa glanced back at Sullivan's motionless form. "Dead," the sheriff confirmed. "Saved the county the cost of a trial." Relief washed over her, followed immediately by exhaustion so profound her knees buckled. Nash caught her, sweeping her into his arms despite his injured shoulder. "I'm taking her home," he told the sheriff. "Of course," the lawman agreed. "We'll handle things here. Stop by my office tomorrow to give statements." The ride back to Silver Creek was largely a blur for Tessa, her mind and body overwhelmed by the day's events. She rode with Nash, cradled against his chest on his horse, Miguel and Billy flanking them protectively. "I thought I'd lost you," Nash murmured against her hair as they rode through the darkness, "when Billy said you'd gone willingly." "I had to," she whispered. "I couldn't bear the thought of you hurt because of me." His arms tightened around her. "Tessa, nothing is worth your safety." "Not me, not the ranch, nothing." "You're wrong," she said simply. "You're worth everything to me." She felt rather than saw his sharp intake of breath. "We have much to discuss," he said finally. "But first, let's get you home." Home, the word had never sounded so beautiful. It was well past midnight when they reached Silver Creek. Hank rushed out to meet them, his weathered face creased with relief at the sight of Tessa safe, and Sullivan's threat ended. Despite her protests that she could walk, Nash carried her into the house and gently deposited her on the sofa in the main room. Miguel brought hot coffee for everyone, and for a time, they simply sat together, the men exchanging abbreviated accounts of their respective roles in the rescue. Billy, it turned out, had been the real hero of the hour. After Tessa left with Sullivan, he'd saddled the fastest horse on the ranch and taken the treacherous back trail to Prescott, cutting the normal travel time nearly in half. Finding Nash and Miguel at the doctor's office, he'd breathlessly explained Sullivan's deception and Tessa's sacrifice. "Knew the boss would move heaven and earth to get you back," the young man told Tessa, blushing at her grateful smile. Gradually, as the adrenaline of the day faded, the men excused themselves, Miguel and Billy, to the bunkhouse, Hank to take the first watch despite Nash's assurance that the danger had passed. Left alone, Tessa and Nash sat in silence for a moment, the weight of all that had happened and all that remained unsaid hanging between them. "You should rest," Nash said finally, his voice gentle. "It's been a long day." Tessa nodded but made no move to leave. "Nash," she began hesitantly, "what happened on the porch last night, was that real, or was it just the danger, the situation?" Nash reached for her hand, enfolding it in his larger one. "It was real," he said simply. "More real than anything I've felt before." "For me too," she admitted, meeting his gaze directly. "I think I've been falling in love with you since Castle Dome." Nash's breath caught, his eyes widening slightly before softening with emotion. "I thought I was rescuing you," he said, his voice rough with feeling. "But the truth is, Tessa, you saved me just as much. This ranch was just land and buildings before you came. You made it a home." He moved closer, his free hand coming up to cup her cheek. "I love you, Tessa Lawson. I think I've loved you since I saw you standing in your uncle's cabin, frightened but unbroken. And if you'll have me, I want to spend the rest of my life making sure you never know fear again." Tears welled in Tessa's eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. "I love you too," she whispered. "And yes, I'll have you, for as long as we both shall live." Nash's kiss was gentle at first, mindful of her exhaustion, but it quickly deepened as emotion overcame caution. When they finally parted, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said simply. "Not because I rescued you or you rescued me, but because together we're stronger than we could ever be apart." Tessa's heart soared at his words. "Yes," she replied without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you, Nash Barrett." His smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, full of promise and the hope of new beginnings. And as he pulled her close again, Tessa knew with absolute certainty that she had found not just safety at Silver Creek, but the truest form of freedom, the freedom to love and be loved in return. The following spring brought new life to Silver Creek Ranch. The rebuilt barn stood stronger than before, the cattle herd had grown with a successful calving season, and Nash's horse breeding operation at the North property was showing promising results under Billy's enthusiastic management. But the most significant new beginning was celebrated on a perfect May morning, as Tessa Lawson became Tessa Barrett in a simple ceremony on the ranch's front porch, surrounded by the people who had become her family. Sheriff Patterson had ridden out from Prescott to officiate, along with half the town it seemed, all eager to witness the union of the couple whose dramatic story had become something of a local legend. "Never seen a prettier bride," Hank declared gruffly as he escorted Tessa down the makeshift aisle, fulfilling the role her father would have played. And indeed, in her gown of ivory silk, a gift from the women of Prescott, who had taken her under their wing with wildflowers in her hair and joy illuminating her face, Tessa was radiant. But it was the look in Nash's eyes as he watched her approach that truly transformed her. The pure love and wonder reflected there made her feel more beautiful than any dress ever could. Their vows were simple but heartfelt. They promised to cherish and protect each other, to build a life of honor and purpose together, and to remember always that true love was not possession but liberation, the freedom to be one's best self beside the other. "By the authority vested in me by the territory of Arizona," Sheriff Patterson concluded with a broad smile, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride, Barrett." Nash needed no further encouragement. His kiss was both tender and passionate, a promise of the life they would build together. The assembled guests erupted in cheers and applause, none louder than Billy, who had appointed himself Nash's best man with all the seriousness his 20 years could muster. The celebration that followed lasted well into the night, with music and dancing, abundant food, and flowing whiskey, though Nash noted wryly that he'd paid dearly enough for whiskey in his lifetime and stuck to a single glass to toast his bride. As the evening stars appeared above Silver Creek, Nash found Tessa standing alone on the porch, gazing out at the land that had become their shared domain. "Having second thoughts, Mrs. Barrett?" he teased gently, coming to stand beside her. Tessa leaned into him, her head fitting perfectly against his shoulder. "Only about how long it took us to get here," she replied with a smile. "We could have been married months ago." "Worth the wait," Nash said, pressing a kiss to her hair. "Wanted to be sure Sullivan's shadow was well and truly gone before we started our life together properly." It was true that the aftermath of Sullivan's death had taken time to settle. There had been official inquiries, testimonies to give, and loose ends to tie up. Sullivan's remaining men had been captured or driven out of the territory, his saloon in Castle Dome sold to new owners, and Tessa's uncle Warren had apparently fled to California after hearing of his former business partner's demise. "I have something for you," Nash said, reaching into his pocket. "A wedding gift." He produced a small velvet pouch and placed it in Tessa's palm. Opening it curiously, she gasped at what lay inside, a delicate gold locket on a fine chain. "It was my mother's," Nash explained softly. "The one thing of value she managed to keep when we ran. She always said it should go to the woman who would share my life someday." Tears welled in Tessa's eyes as she opened the locket to find a tiny daguerreotype of a woman with Nash's striking blue eyes. She was beautiful, Tessa whispered. I wish I could have known her. She would have loved you, Nash said with certainty. She always said true strength isn't in never falling, but in rising every time you fall. You're the strongest person I know, Tessa. Only because I have you to help me stand, she replied, turning in his arms to face him fully. Nash shook his head, his expression earnest. No, you were strong long before me. You survived your parents' deaths, your uncle's betrayal, Sullivan's threats. You never broke, never surrendered your spirit. His voice roughened with emotion. That's why I love you, Tessa Barrett. Not because I saved you, but because you never needed saving. You just needed someone to recognize your worth. Tessa reached up to touch his face, her heart so full it seemed impossible to contain such happiness. And you did, from the very first moment. When everyone else saw property to be traded, you saw a person of value. The most valuable treasure I've ever found, Nash agreed, lowering his head to claim her lips once more. Inside, the celebration continued, but for the newlyweds, the world had narrowed to just the two of them, standing together under the vast Arizona sky that had witnessed their journey from strangers to saviors to beloved partners. Their story had begun with a trade a woman for whiskey, and then whiskey for freedom. But what had grown between them was beyond price. A love founded on respect, forged in adversity, and destined to flourish in the life they would build together at Silver Creek Ranch. 5 years later, Silver Creek Ranch had prospered beyond Nash's most ambitious hopes. The cattle operation had tripled in size, the horse breeding program had gained a reputation throughout the Arizona territory for producing superior stock, and the original homestead had expanded to include several new outbuildings, improved pastures, and a schoolhouse that served not only the Barrett children but those of neighboring ranches as well. On a bright autumn morning, Nash stood on the porch watching his wife in the garden, their 3-year-old son Thomas toddling after her with a small watering can while their infant daughter Catherine slept in a basket in the shade of an apple tree Nash had planted the day they were married. The sight never failed to fill Nash with a profound sense of gratitude. His family, a blessing he had once thought beyond his reach, thrived in this home they had built together. Papa, Thomas spotted him and came running, water sloshing from his can. Help plant. Nash scooped up his son, chuckling at the boy's enthusiasm. What are you and Mama planting today, partner? Flowers for baby, Thomas announced proudly. Kathy likes yellow. Is that so? Nash raised an eyebrow at Tessa as she approached, wiping her hands on her apron. And how does he know his sister's color preferences already? Tessa's smile, still as captivating as the day they met, warmed his heart. He decided she must like yellow because it's sunny and Kathy is always happiest in the morning sun. Can't argue with that logic, Nash agreed, leaning down to kiss his wife while their son squirmed impatiently in his arms. Hank says the new hands are settling in well, Tessa said as they walked together toward the garden. Though he's still grumbling about Billy taking Miguel to help at the North property. Nash smiled at the mention of Billy, who had matured into a fine horseman and now managed the breeding operation with Miguel as his right hand. Hank would grumble if the governor himself came to help with the herd. He'll adjust. The ranch's success had necessitated hiring additional hands, and Silver Creek now employed a dozen men year-round with more during the busy seasons. Nash had built a reputation as a fair employer who paid well and treated his workers with respect, and positions at the ranch were sought after throughout the territory. Mrs. Redmond says the school needs more books, Tessa mentioned as they reached the garden. She set Thomas down with instructions to pull the weeds around the rosebushes, his favorite task, because it let him get satisfyingly dirty. The Thompson children have read everything twice over, Nash nodded thoughtfully. The schoolhouse had been Tessa's project from the beginning, a fulfillment of her father's dream to bring education to the frontier. Starting with just Thomas and the children of their workers, it now served 15 students from ages 5 to 16. I'll talk to Sheriff Patterson when I'm in town next week, Nash promised. His sister in Boston is always looking for good causes to support. Maybe she can arrange a shipment of books. Tessa smiled, bending to check on Catherine, who had begun to stir in her basket. I still can't believe how much has changed, she said softly, lifting the baby into her arms. Sometimes I remember that day in Castle Dome, how hopeless everything seemed, and then I look at all this. She gestured to encompass the ranch, their children, the life they'd built together. Nash moved to stand beside her, one arm around her waist as they both gazed at their daughter's perfect face. Catherine's eyes, blue like her father's, blinked drowsily up at them. "I'd pay that whiskey 100 times over," Nash said quietly. "Though I think I got the far better end of that bargain." Tessa leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder in the familiar gesture that still filled him with contentment. "No bargain at all," she corrected gently. "Just love finding its way home." As if to punctuate her words, Thomas came running back, his small hands full of dandelions. "For Mama," he announced, presenting his treasure with a solemn expression that matched his father's when making important decisions. Tessa accepted the weeds as if they were the finest roses, thanking their son with a kiss on his dirt-smudged cheek. Nash watched them, his heart so full it seemed impossible to contain such happiness. This, he thought, was the true meaning of wealth, not the cattle or horses or land, but the love that flowed between them, binding them together stronger than any contract ever could. From a trade made in desperation had grown a legacy of love, one that would endure long after they were gone, passed down through their children and the generations that would follow. And as Nash Barrett stood with his family in the garden of Silver Creek Ranch, he knew with absolute certainty that no fortune in the world could compare to the riches he had found in Tessa's love.